This is the Keys to the Shop Rate of Rise series brought to you by Roast Magazine. Today we're talking with Ann Cooper of Equilibrium Master Roasters. Well, hey everybody, this is Chris DeFurio with Keys to the Shop. I hope you are doing well and that you are having a great new year so far. It's the first day of 2021 and hopes are high. And I want to welcome you to the first of a series of episodes coming on the first Friday of every month called Rate of Rise, Elevated Conversations on Roasting, brought to you in partnership with Roast Magazine. Our interviews are going to be featuring coffee roasting experts from all over the world, and we're going to be doing a deep dive into lots of different topics that are going to help you thrive as a coffee roaster. So I'm really excited about this. And like I mentioned, this is brought to you in partnership with Roast Magazine, which is one of the longest running and most respected trade journals in the coffee industry. And they've come up with a new series called Roast Audio Articles. They're presenting audio versions of articles from the Roast Magazine archive covering coffee from a technical perspective. And these really help you keep up with the latest research, knowledge, and insights from scientists, subject matter experts, and professionals across the industry. And you should definitely check it out over at roastmagazine.com/audio articles. You can peruse the various episodes on your web browser and listen and subscribe on SoundCloud to access new issues as they are released. So again, that's roastmagazine.com/audio articles, and you should just be subscribed to Roast Magazine anyway. So go do that for sure. Now today I'm so thrilled to be able to be talking with Ann Cooper of Equilibrium Master Roasters. She wrote an article for Roast Magazine called Understanding the Potential in Your Coffee Roasting Machine. It's one of Roast Magazine's audio articles. Ann has been working in the coffee industry for over 25 years. She's an Australian coffee roaster who has gained extensive experience in many areas of the coffee industry. We're talking from barista, cafe owner and manager, national barista trainer, head roaster, and roasting production manager at both a national and international level. As a certified Q grader, Ann regularly attends, volunteers, and competes and judges in regional, national, and international coffee competitions in Australia, USA, and Brazil. And with her consulting company, Equilibrium Master Roasters, Ann continues to develop her extensive roasting skills and knowledge with exposure to a wide range of roasting companies and machines, various roasting techniques, and industry-relevant processes. She is just really passionate about passing on the great skills and knowledge to the next generation of flame keepers. And in this conversation today, we're going to take it from the place of understanding the potential of your coffee roasting machine and then extend it to a conversation focusing on setting yourself up for success in coffee roasting through proper data collection, equipment knowledge, establishing solid protocols, and balancing the use of software and tools with a deep sensory understanding of the roasting process. And that's just a few of the many things that we cover in this interview. So there's a lot here. Let's get right to our interview on our first episode of the Rate of Rise series from Keys to the Shop and Roast Magazine, featuring Ann Cooper of Equilibrium Master Roasters. Well, Ann, so glad to have you on the show. How are you today?
I'm very well. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a long time coming, hasn't it?
It has. And the funny inside backstory is that apparently I photobombed one of your favorite coffee roasting photos of yourself.
You did, yes. I think it's almost 10 years ago now. So, it's definitely one of my most favorite photos. And there you are in the corner.
Yeah, I'll have to put that on the website.
Absolutely.
The full photo on the show page for this episode if people want to see a slightly heavier version of me. But yeah, it is meant to be apparently. So here we are. And I've just been following your career and your work for quite a while. And I'm excited to get you on the show to talk about roasting. And obviously, that topic covers such a myriad of different subtopics, and we're going to hit on a lot of things today. And most importantly, we're going to be talking about the getting the most out of what you do as a roaster and what you're working with as a roaster. So, I guess to start off the conversation, you've been doing this for so long, and over time, I'm sure that you get to see where the industry has been, where it's going. So I guess to start off, let's ask, how has the landscape of roasting changed regarding the knowledge and ability of roasters themselves in specialty coffee, even within like 10, 15 years?
Oh, it's been quite significant. And I think I mean, using myself, as an example, when I first started roasting, and even when you saw me, roasting at Dallas Brothers, we all sort of like start off, kind of just following. And, we sort of go through stages of being told what to do, and we're sort of not quite sure why we're doing something. So I guess that whole premise of like why, and I would definitely say over the years there's been more ability, better, like I guess in terms of resources created to sort of start helping answering all of those whys. Well, why am I following this profile? Why am I doing these steps? But also sort of like, always bringing us back to remind us that we're in the business of flavor, like we're creating something to be tasted. And sometimes we can forget that as roasters. And then sort of like reminding us in terms of everything that we're doing in the whole roasting process, the cooking strategies, the management of the machines, and even the design of the machines, over the years have significantly improved in terms of whether it's, material quality, controls, all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, so I've been like, roasting since 2007, but then like consulting and training, pretty much like full time the last 5 years, and definitely been in lots of great situations where you see roasters at all different levels of experience, and then seeing what they're thinking about, how they're managing their thought processes with their roasting. But yeah, definitely in terms of like knowledge and the ability of roasters, it's definitely significantly improved for sure.
Yeah, that is interesting to think about how many tools have been proliferated over the years to make something like roasting more accessible and give you tighter controls. And I'm just thinking about a conversation, I forget which episode, it's James Hoffman, we were talking about accessibility to opening a coffee bar, for example. The barrier to entry is fairly low.
Yes.
Is that a problem?
So, I mean, I would probably say, with the hot topic of this year with like, COVID and, people being in situations where they've, lost their job, there's a lot of people from other industries turning their attention to coffee, and they go, oh, I like coffee, I'm going to start roasting. It seems to be something that I can do pretty easily. And definitely that barrier to entry is a hot topic in terms of definitely this year, a lot of my consulting has been dealing with non-industry people that have had the ability to, or, potentially even the capital to invest in equipment. And then they go, oh, well, now I can buy the equipment. Now I need to learn how to roast. And so I've been dealing with a lot of those people this year, and it really highlighted for me in terms of even the kind of information that's available, what they're doing, and they're doing the right thing. They're looking on the internet, they're trying to read books, they're trying to watch videos, but a lot of that stuff still doesn't, communicate the hands-on practical premise of what we're doing as roasters. And so when you walk into one of these setups with these new non-industry people that have, been able to buy the equipment, and they're standing there and you're looking going, and I was with some gentleman recently that they did the right thing. They bought all the best equipment. They turned the roaster on, but they didn't realize that they didn't turn it on the right way. And they could have very well potentially been in a very dangerous situation. Oh, no. It was quite, and luckily, because we did a quick walk around and they had, some things turned off that were supposed to be open and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, it could have been very dangerous for them. So yeah, barrier to entry is definitely something that we're strongly facing, definitely now in the industry because of this year for sure. And it's definitely highlighting training techniques, information available, but reinforcing that hands-on practical need for training and more decisive training in roasting.
Earlier, you had mentioned we're in the business of coffee roasters are in the business of creating flavors. Because of that, it seems like the metric of your success is based in the cup. And, when we're talking about how we judge whether or not we're successful in something like roasting, we're comparing ourselves against what we think should be in the cup versus what is in the cup. And I wonder, how has that changed in terms of, with the barrier to entry being a little bit lower because of all the resources, calling victory a little sooner in terms of your roast profiles and being kind of fooled by the exactitude of your, cropster or whatever it is you're using. Is it almost similar to how people used to just like judge it based on the color back in the day when they were using a cast iron and other things like that?
Oh, a couple of really good points there. I think definitely one of the underlying things, because of this whole, I was going to use a really bad, like globalness, with our roasting. I think palate preference is one of those things that is that underlying feature that can cause a little bit of, issue in our roasting. And because we've got, so many, obviously we've got the cultural palate preference, and then within that culture, there's different regional palate preference. And that's, when you kind of see differences between profile approaches, what people think is right. And it just kind of brings up that whole, there's no right or wrong, in roasting because of palate preference. But I think that point you just sort of like brought up in terms of back in the day when it was all about watching color, that's what I believe we need to be, we need to be reconnecting with that, I guess, dare I say, that old school technique, because that's the underpinning thing of exactly what we're doing. It's that running joke in the industry where we're turning beans brown, but it's how you do that. And this is where then, we've got that connection between watching the coffee and then using the data accordingly. And probably one of the most common things I've had to say to roasters this year is, are you roasting the software or are you roasting the coffee in the roaster? Like, what are you doing in terms of when they're quite confused and they're not understanding, what they're doing and they're not able to connect it to their flavors. It's often because they're focusing on the wrong data. And then it brings up that whole, well, how do I know what is the right data? All that kind of stuff. So, and then in terms of like knowing your machine, in terms of, you mentioned cast iron, it sort of brings up all those community myths in terms of, buy this machine, you'll get this kind of flavor, all that kind of stuff. Where it's actually, the profile that influences flavor, not the machine. And so trying to help roasters understand that they may be investing in some of the best equipment and thinking that, the machine will do it for me because that's what the marketing said. But it's really highlighting our understanding of the cooking strategy. How are we turning those beans brown? And then how do we then best analyze what we've done so then we can understand and connect it to what we're getting in the cup. And then, of course, back to that whole underpinning of cultural palate preference. And just knowing our machine. And so definitely one of those big, myths we've got to break down is there's no such thing as a cast iron drum. That's just not possible. So there's a lot of things that, a lot of these non-industry, people are reading all these myths and getting a little bit confused with, well, what is actually, how do the machines work, and how do I know what's right, what's the best machine, or feeling bad about only having enough capital to buy a fairly cheap machine. Can they get good coffee from a cheap machine? All that kind of stuff. So it's really reminding roasters about that the profile is what really influences flavor. And then understanding then the limitations that either the profile can present because the machine is either not capable of producing the profile that you have in mind, and whether it's like build quality, materials, all that kind of stuff. And that's where you sort of start going down that rabbit hole of, experimenting, trying different things, because you're trying to understand how to control the roaster because you've got a profile in mind that you want to create, all that kind of stuff.
Right. So getting to know your equipment, that is paramount. And
it's paramount.
It's also, it makes me think about, first of all, when you're talking about all the differences, and especially for non-industry people, when you have a lot of conflicting marketing, you just want to pick one and plug your ears and forget it. And for industry people, it feels like your time in the industry is a lot of different preconceptions that you had being completely obliterated by experience. And so like this balance of, our goal here is to have a healthy skepticism towards, whether or not we're achieving our why, our goal, and getting to know your equipment and maximizing your equipment is not the same as having ultimate faith in your equipment, I guess.
Yeah, because like the most, I guess, like, yeah, again, like using, you know, these new people to the industry, when they walk up to this machine, even they will say, look, we don't know what to do. And so it's in terms of helping them understand, well, by getting to know your machine, you're understanding how to drive it. And then, but then it also highlights, how do they know how to drive it, because they're still working out their profile, because a profile is also flavor. That's what's creating our flavor. That's our recipe, our roadmap. And so that's, what I've got to work on with a lot of, roasters, whether they're experienced or inexperienced, is helping them understand their roadmap, their recipe, their profile, so then they can better understand how, because that profile is basically going to teach them how to use their roaster. It's going to force them to adjust the machine, to make it cook the coffee the way that they want to cook the coffee. So that cooking strategy is everything. And then understanding, whether it's the type of burner you have, the type of drum, in terms of thickness and materials, what level of insulation do you have or not have. And then I guess then it brings up that, airflow is one of those massive things that gets, misunderstood in, knowing a machine, when to use it, when not to use it, how to best use it, why do you use it, all of that kind of stuff. Yeah, as opposed to like, having the faith that, oh yeah, I'll just like chuck it in and, the machine will do it for me, kind of thing.
Yeah, because surely the manufacturer has worked out how to make perfect coffee. Otherwise, they wouldn't be selling a roaster.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep.
So practically speaking, since I think most people in the audience here are existing roasters, and we might have some people that are just thinking about getting into this, and we've kind of been addressing some of that perspective here, but taking them through the perspective of, let's walk into the roastery when everything is shut down and you're looking at the landscape of what you've got in your equipment. I mean, you want to level up for the new year. You want to, get to know your equipment better, but also just, you want that coffee to really be consistent and to sing. I mean, what is the first step or first couple steps that someone has to do to actually, practically speaking, get to know their equipment better and therefore get the most from their coffee and their equipment?
Probably, there's a couple of things. Definitely in terms of better understanding the probe that they have on their roaster. The first thing I do when I walk into a consult with a roaster, without them, kind of realizing you're having a chat, I'm already scanning their roaster in terms of getting an idea about where their probes are, what type they are, what thickness they are. And then, because that then gives me an idea about the kind of data points that we're working with. And I guess it's like, helping everyone, roasters understand the kind of like numbers and numbers. Those numbers are just specific to their unique setup on their roaster. So I guess, that's the first thing in terms of, it would have been great, many, many years ago, if manufacturers, kind of realized, oh, let's all use the same kind of probe. Let's all try and position them in the same spot on the roaster. That would be fabulous for the industry in terms of education and, recipe sharing and all that kind of stuff. And then along with that, knowing the probe, and of course then, because when I get a registration for an online consult, I definitely, one of the key questions is asking roasters, tell me about your machine. And I would probably only say only 5% of those that registered would mention their probe. And so that really highlighted to me a really, lack of connection with that really, very important, aspect of our machine. Because then it brings up what I'm leading to in terms of is then data collection. If you really want to level up with your roasting, it's focusing on the right data. So I know, and even if you're using software, whether you're using, Artisan, Cropster, what other, other software applications that are out there, it's really important you create for yourself like a roast log, and you're then, writing down a summary of all of the key data points, in your profile. And that's when it then comes back to then, I guess that connecting to that old school technique of going back to watching the coffee and really identifying the key phases, the key physical changes of the coffee in the roaster, assigning a data point to those physical changes and then a time. And this is where you can really use your probe data points to your advantage, because it really helps you connect with how you're cooking the coffee. It shows you why it's tasting a certain way, because you'll quickly realize you've either gone too fast or too slow, to a particular data point, and then you can fix it, fairly quickly, because you've recognized that, oh, I don't like that flavor. I went through Maillard too quickly. Okay, next time I roast that coffee, I'm going to lengthen my Maillard, or whatever you want to do, with that. So strengthening your connection to your data points with better data collection is definitely something that I would definitely recommend in terms of leveling up. And definitely then, like, knowing your green. A lot of the time, it's very easy to forget the coffee that we're roasting. I know that sounds really weird, or kind of funny to hear, but a lot of roasters kind of forget the inherent properties of the green in terms of moisture content, screen size, density, the batch size, because that really helps us better understand how we're then manipulating the heat, how we're transferring heat into that mass and into that specific coffee. But probably the biggest thing I would recommend in terms of is probe recognition, the data points, and the focusing on the right data collection.
Well, excellent point, and no pun intended there. But the question that comes to mind is, once I start collecting data points and I get them in a logbook and everything else, I mean, you said you'll quickly find out. How soon is quickly? Because collecting that data and then drawing a correlation between the data and what you need to do in the roaster is, I feel like it's a little more complex than that. I mean, how long do you have to collect data before you can actually start using it for confident decisions?
Fabulous question. So, and this is where it brings back that whole feedback loop in terms of our QC and our tasting. And this is where it really reminds us as roasters that we're in the business of flavor. So you do, your roast session, you record all of your data points on your roast log sheet. And then, good QC practice should be, next day after roasting, whether it's during your preheat cycle, you should always head into your next roasting session knowing what your coffee tastes like. So I always make sure that I cup the next day. And then I've made notes about what I like and don't like about what I roasted. And then I go back to my roast log sheet and I get a highlighter, and then I highlight my favorite roast. And then as a result, I'm also highlighting all of the data points that created that favorite flavor. Now, those data points will then be connected obviously to, our software, our profile. So then we go into our software and we put a star, or we mark that profile to continue to follow. So then in terms of how long, now this is where, for me, even though I'm using software, I'm probably still a little bit, I do use, the paper format with the roast log. A lot of roasters like to use either just an Excel, so they'll be doing it while they're roasting, and that's a really great thing to do as well. So then, it could take you maybe, a month or more of, recording all of those data points, because then once you highlight them, you can then summarize them and you can create your parameters for your brand and your products. And that's another thing I'm really passionate about showing roasters how to do, is to back themselves and to show themselves what they like in terms of flavors, how they created that on their specific machine, and then to be able to stand back and really stand behind their palate preference with their own parameters. I would definitely say it might take a month to 6 months of data collection, so you can then summarize and create your specific parameters for your palate preference and your products and your branding.
How do you do that beforehand when you come into a roasting situation? Do you prefer people to come with already formed palate preference for their coffees, or like you just explained, that you can have this discovery of, oh geez, I guess we like jasmine a lot here, and
this is how we created it. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is one better than the other?
I mean, I guess it depends on where in the portfolio of products it's headed. If you've got peanut butter in a really nice pour over, you might not. Some people might not like that. Right. Or if you've got your jasmine, in an espresso, it might not necessarily suit that particular product. But 100% yes. Before when I walk in to see a roaster, 100% we taste straight away. That's the first thing we always do, because I need to calibrate and understand with them what it is that they're tasting. So then I can also identify what it is that they're potentially not enjoying in their flavors. So then we can then start then pinpointing in their whether in their profile data, in their roast log sheets, whatever it is that they've been doing, we can start pinpointing where the issues are. And then we can start editing and tweaking their profiles pretty quickly after tasting, and then go from there.
Yeah. So I'm curious about this as a cafe consultant myself, and as you do roasting consulting. And one of the truths I think that happens is you get called into a situation where the problem is described one way, but it's discovered to be something else. Mm-hmm. From your vantage point, what is it that people are calling you up about, and they're pretty sure that this is the problem, but it's actually not the problem? What are the things people are misled by commonly when they think they have a problem, but it's actually something else?
9 times out of 10, it would probably be just understanding machine setup, or it would also probably be, potentially. I have been in a situation where it was as simple as their QC procedures, their protocols weren't quite correct. So it was giving them an incorrect flavor in the cup. So we've got to be always very careful, making sure that they're setting up whether they're cupping or their espresso extractions, however they're doing their QC. We've really got to make sure that that's on point, because that can send a roaster down the wrong path, especially if they're tasting things like sourness, dryness, underdeveloped kind of flavors. And even probably because if they're not grinding properly, they're not dosing the right amount, all that kind of stuff, that will really, affect their perception of what they're doing. And then they start making changes on the roaster, and then it starts getting really nasty because they start making changes when they probably shouldn't have, because their cupping just wasn't set up properly. That's probably the most common thing I would come across, sometimes with that kind of situation.
That's really interesting, and it makes me think about that old thing, that tension between the front of house and the roaster, where everyone just kind of says, well, this batch of coffee is bad. Let's tell the roaster that they don't know what they're doing. Mm-hmm. The barista or the manager in the cafe. I'm looking at the problems in the roaster. When I'm looking to adjust something in the roaster, let's say it actually is the equipment. What are the levers that we pull that are going to make the biggest difference in creating the flavors in the coffee?
Well, I guess it's identifying, I guess it's like using that data collection in terms of that roast log sheet. And then if it would be checking against your parameters, because the ultimate goal with this data collection is to create a table of, summarized parameters. So then you can say, okay, my drip profile is always these data points. My single origin espresso, are these data points, and so on. So and I guess what's happening at the moment as well is that we're being challenged immensely at the moment by a lot of experimenting, by producers. There's a lot of, experimental processes, some new varieties constantly. They seem to be, quite a few popping up lately. So we're being challenged by, origins that were traditionally processing a certain way, now trying something different. And so we're kind of being challenged by, this is I guess Colombia is a great example with all the naturals coming out. How do I know this is the best expression of this, Colombian as a natural process? And so what we thought, we should have been doing is not working for this particular coffee. So then, it just brings up that challenge of, well, how can we break down the profile into the data points and the timing of, specific phases. And then if we feel this particular natural, process, Colombian, it may best work with, a shorter time after first crack. What do I need to do then to be able to control that coffee, on the roaster? So do I need to consider things like, deeper gas controls, going down, like lower, going slower, all that kind of stuff. So I guess, yeah, it's a combination of, tapping in that, knowing the green, what it is that we want to express from that. And then I think it's then being decisive enough to make that decision to be able to tweak and edit, particular timings, because that's then going to force us to drive the roaster a certain way, to then influence that flavor. So I think it's always having that feedback loop in terms of knowing what we want, manipulating and driving the roaster, and then tasting it, and then kind of going, okay, that worked or that didn't work, as well as also remembering, the coffee that we're roasting and why we're manipulating it a certain way. So yeah, I mean, things like, when you bring up things like airflow, that's very much machine design specific. So what you would do on a Diedrich, you wouldn't do on a Probat, for example. And whether that comes down to better understanding the design of the drum and the burners, because and definitely in terms of levels of heat retention and heat transfer, airflow should be used as a tool. It shouldn't be used. It should be there to use to help, not as like a fussy control. A lot of roasters think that, I have to increase the airflow for the rest of the roast because that's what I'm supposed to do to get the smoke out and all that kind of stuff. But then they realize, it's affecting the energy in the system. And so then, really bringing up that better understanding of that, roasting is majority convection. So we've really got to babysit and really look after our exhaust, temperatures. And if you do that the wrong way on the wrong system, because a particular system is going to have more heat retention and one doesn't, and if you misunderstand how to use that airflow, that's when you start getting into a lot of trouble. And that's where I can understand, beginner roasters or inexperienced roasters getting a little bit kind of lost because they're reading, I have to increase airflow or do these changes, but they're forgetting about the kind of system that they're manipulating and using as well.
What about experienced roasters, though? I mean, they're sure when people are roasting they say, I've been roasting for 10 years and 20 years. And often it's the idea that, I've been doing it for so long, I must know what I'm doing. But that's not always the case for any profession, I guess.
Yep. I think it still comes back to knowing how to be decisive. It's kind of also kind of like odd to hear that there's still a little bit of lack of belief in the fact that we're cooking the coffee and the fact that coffee does, physically change. And it's believing, it's kind of back to your point all the way at the beginning in terms of that old school technique of watching the color and watching the change in the beans, because with the introduction of software and really focusing on the data points, it's kind of like probably the experienced roasters are the ones that I'm saying, are you roasting the software or are you roasting the coffee in the roaster? Where they really get, we all naturally go through phases. We naturally go through, data phases, or you'll roast with just the exhaust, or you'll roast just by, we'll be on the trier too much, all that kind of stuff. But I think for experienced roasters, it's potentially that little bit of like also them sort of like admitting what they don't know. And it's knowing how to connect then the sensory with the data points is, definitely something that I would see, quite a lot. And surprisingly still not tasting their coffee enough, as odd as that is to hear. We sort of get caught into that I'm too busy excuse. And a lot of roasters go, I don't have time to, to taste, or cupping's a waste of time and all that kind of stuff. When it's, it's the premise of everything that we're doing. we're roasting something to be tasted. So we need to be knowing exactly how our coffee is tasting. But I think, decisiveness is definitely something that a lot of experienced roasters still struggle with.
In that vein, there is this idea that no news is good news and no one's complaining and we've got good reviews for our coffee. So maybe that's justification either explicitly or subconsciously that we don't need to make these types of decisions because the decisions that we have been making are fine. And I wonder what you would say to somebody who has that kind of a view in towards what they do with the coffee.
Oh, that's a very interesting point, because I guess because it brings up, well, my customers are enjoying it. So, and I'm doing well, the business is doing well as a result, as long as they understand exactly how they created those flavors. And I think sometimes that's where, if a roaster starts to see or doesn't realize how they created those flavors, and then all of a sudden they need to better understand, or they want to try something different, I think that's where some of those roasters might, get themselves into a little bit of a pickle, because they're kind of going, oh, what's going on? I've been roasting a certain way for so long and doing so well, but now I want to try something different. And so they but then they get a bit stuck because they either got lax with their data collection and they just do it the same way every time, and that's fine. But it's when you want to start exploring and, sort of like stepping out of your comfort zone a bit, that's when it can get a bit, tricky for them. If a roaster is happy with, their business and how it's performing and what they're doing, then, there's no reason for them to change anything. If anything, I would just say find a way to strengthen, if you haven't been doing it, just to strengthen your support in terms of your data collection and what you're doing, because touch wood, that there might be a time when you can't be there and you need somebody to be able to step in and help you out. And if you don't have that support to be able to replicate, that product, then that's when, that could be a shame for that business. So again, it comes back to that strengthening in terms of, your data collection and how you're creating those particular products.
Right. And the decision to get the most out of your equipment is a decision to, in some ways, change the flavors that your customers are going to taste in the coffee. And I guess in specialty coffee, you have such usually an array of different flavors available on your shelf. And so it's not as detrimental as if you just had like one flavor profile that you radically changed and everybody was pissed because of it. But if you improve and people don't think it's an improvement, I mean, that I guess that's partially, that pickle you're talking about. Like, we can kind of change something needlessly. And I mean, what kind of experimentation is experimentation and optimization that actually leads to better business and kind of responsible changes in what we're doing with the coffee versus just kind of on a whim, I'm just going to change the way that I roast coffee because I'm bored. It might not be a good reason to just do it.
And I think but again, it then highlights, the roaster's understanding of, their demographic, their flavor profile, the way the machine set up, the green that they're roasting, the kind of flavors that they're producing. But if it's based on speculation, then, that's kind of clearly showing that as a roaster, you're kind of doubting yourself and, you're not really understanding everything about your roasting. So yeah, that whole doubt versus confidence, I would say, with that.
Back to your points about how what works with one roaster doesn't work with another roaster. And what we see a lot online is the sharing of roast curves. And
yes,
this is a Pandora's box, I guess.
Yeah, it really breaks my heart when I see those posts on the forums, because it just really showcases how much in the industry, whether that person just doesn't get it, or as an industry, how can we really better help ourselves? Like, if roasting can be that simple. And I guess it's whether it's, human nature, whether we try and, overcomplicate it with, focusing on certain things. But yeah, when I see those posts about the profiles, like you really want to help them understand in terms of, again, you've got to go through those three key things, like knowing what do you know about your machine, what do you know about the green that you're roasting, and where is it meant to be in terms of your portfolio of products, and then knowing your flavors. And so in terms of what's your profile, what are the data points that create that? So then you can better understand why you're, because those lines on the screen, they're just the feedback loop from the probe. And so there's, again, that Pandora's box of that probe has so much going on in terms of, thickness, type, positioning. Are the wires connected properly? Are you getting, feedback on the screen because of a setup problem, all that kind of stuff. So we've got to be very careful about analyzing the lines on the screen and kind of forgetting about that underpinning process of green to brown. Like, how are we turning those beans green to brown, and the timing of that, and then how to better use those data points for that. So it really breaks my heart when you see those pictures and they're sort of going, hey, here's my profile of blah, blah, blah. What do you think? And it's just like, oh, goodness. Like, there's that whole checklist of questions that pop up in terms of what are you trying to achieve with that coffee? What's your flavor preference? What are your data points? What kind of controls do you have on the roaster? Do you have the right amount of gas pressure coming into the roaster? Is there a limitation in the profile and the machine setup? All that kind of stuff. It's like, yeah, it brings up a lot.
Well, a lot of what roasters have to deal with is the solitary nature of the job. And it feels like, the eagerness to be in community leads to somewhat the overblown importance of these types of things, where you want to share all this stuff, but it really is like we seem to have this through line through this conversation is, well, it depends on what's going on in your roastery and on your machine.
I think depends is the key word. Yeah.
Right. And so it feels like, okay, well, I want to be able to learn from other roasters. What can I learn from them based on the fact that so much of what is going to optimize my equipment and my results is just staring me in the face every day?
Yep. And I think it's like really helping those roasters be able to, it's like, you step up to the roaster. It's almost like, it's a bit of a Zen moment. You kind of walk up to the roaster, you take a big breath and you go, right, what do I have? It's like when you get into, I think I use the example of getting into a rental car sometimes. It's like when you jump into a rental, the first thing you do is you sort of like work out your spatial awareness in terms of like, where are the indicators? Where's the wipers? Where's the headlights? What kind of control do I have? Is it manual? Is it automatic? Am I driving in the US? Am I driving in Australia? What side of the road am I on? All that kind of stuff. So it's the same when you step up to a roaster. You kind of like work out what kind of controls do I have or not have? What's giving me my feedback in terms of, with the probe? What kind of, materials, what's going on with the design of the roaster? So, and once you get comfortable with that, it's almost like you work backwards. You've kind of got to do, if you were to step up to a roaster for the first time, use your seasoning process as a way to also understand everything about the roaster in terms of watching the data points, like kind of work backwards, like do your sacrificial roasts, work out, oh, okay, well, the beans turn yellow at this temperature, the beans crack at this temperature. So you start, grabbing all of your key data points. You start learning about the machine then. And then you go, okay, great. Now I know my key data points from the probe. Now I've just got to learn how to drive this, how fast or how slow can I do that? And then what kind of controls do I have in terms of what kind of burner do I have? Or what design is it? Is it an air roaster? Is it a traditional drum roaster with a direct flame, all that kind of stuff. So you've just then got to learn how to transfer heat and then to make things move at a certain pace.
Let's say that we're a new roaster and going on that idea of having these sacrificial roasts and got the roaster installed in your rented warehouse space. And now you're not quite there serving coffee to people or selling coffee. You're experimenting. I mean, how long do you advise that people who are going to open a roastery roast coffee before they actually put a public face on it and say, this is us?
That's a great question. I mean, if they get somebody like the gentleman I mentioned earlier, where like they bought a roaster, they got me in, like within a day, like I can have them up and running with profiles, but then it's them building that muscle memory, for themselves. So I think that's the key with new roasters is is giving yourself the opportunity to, obviously you can get a consultant in, help you set your profiles, but you've got to practice, do those profiles over and over again, and that learn that general movement around the machine. So that can take, depending on how, and this is the great thing about roasting, it really shows you how you work. And so if you're somebody that kind of forgets to do things, then you'll quickly learn very quickly. If you forget to close the cooling tray, or if you forget to close something, mistakes are going to start happening, left, right, and center. But look, you could say within a month of constant practice, that you would definitely have something, sellable, ready to go. But it's hard to, if you're an owner operator, finding that time to dedicate to, setting up your business, dedicating the time to your roasting. And then it's all that logistics, it's all that beyond the cooling tray kind of stuff in terms of, your packing, your cleaning, your, just everything, besides roasting. So yeah, so you can get set up fairly quickly, but I would say within a month of solid practice. But then then it's that time. It could take 6 months. Depending on how much time you've got to be able to commit to that constant practice and building that muscle memory of the whole roasting process.
Right. And that certainly is the case, that having hands on and eyes on, someone like like yourself in the mix can accelerate that process. But getting to know yourself sounds just as important as getting to know your equipment.
Yeah, definitely. And that's what I've got to be careful as a consultant as well, because by leapfrogging somebody to success fairly quickly, they kind of miss that time of making mistakes. So we've got to be very mindful about that. We can set them up very quickly to sell coffee very quickly, but yeah, they've got to go through, unfortunately, that process of, making some really good mistakes so they can learn themselves in terms of, oh, okay, let's not do that again.
Right. I like that. Good mistakes. That's a great way to think about it. So we've talked about a whole swath of things, and likely could talk about a lot more.
It's just scratching the surface.
Yes. So rounding out the conversation here, I wonder what you would, just final words of advice to people who want to really level up their roasting and start by just getting the most out of their equipment and themselves, I guess, both and.
I think I would definitely say, as I mentioned earlier, is really backing yourself up with the right information. But you'll know that it's right if you continue that feedback loop of recording your data and then tasting, giving yourself an opportunity to then, really highlight what it is that you like, so you can see what created that. I think that's the most important thing, because it's showing us the flavors that we like, and it's showing us how we created that. So then, on your specific setup, exactly, what it is that created those right flavors. So, and in terms of and making sure that data is the right data, as well. And yeah, I think I would definitely say it's kind of like what I mentioned earlier, that right data collection, that feedback loop, and showing yourself what it is that you like and don't like about those flavors. So you can really, it's almost like, you're putting your foot down and going, yep, this is what I really like, and this is how I created it. And now I know what to stick to in terms of that profile.
Right. Decisiveness.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's probably my theme for this year in terms of helping roasters be more decisive. And, really in this whole, the reality of roasting is really highlighting exactly what it is that we're focusing on, and really breaking down, again, like, it breaks my heart when I hear out there in the industry that little bit of, negative kind of like, whether it's negative comments or thought processes towards those really awesome old, dare I say, old school techniques. Again, back to that. What are we doing when we're roasting? We're physically changing. The beans do change. And it really breaks my heart to hear that there's people out there saying, oh, don't look at the coffee, only focus on, the data on the screen. Whereas we need to bring them together. We need to bring the sensory and the data together. They need each other. The data is nothing without the coffee and the roaster. So that's what I'm just, really super passionate about that. And roasters learning that from the get-go.
Well said. Well said. And you're certainly doing that with what you do for roasters. And I'm so thankful that I got a chance to talk with you about this. And where can we go to learn more about what you do? Tell us where to find you.
Yeah. So my website is eqmr.com.au. And I've got heaps of links on there where I do some really great, some online group sessions with Map It Forward. So we'll be starting those again, I think in January. Oh my God, I can't believe that's coming around so fast. But we've had a lot of fun, and there's roasters from all over the world in that group. So it's a great opportunity. It's like a mastermind group where roasters bring any concerns, like, profiles that they're working on, any questions. And so we limit the group to a size of 6. So it's not too big, it's not too small. And there's plenty of opportunity for people to get their questions and thoughts addressed. And then online consulting for myself. Again, I'm available, for obviously roasters worldwide, in terms of, doesn't matter if it's, 2 a.m. and to meet your time zone, that's totally fine. But online consulting's been fun. And that's definitely highlighted some really great opportunities in how we, communicate and teach and talk about our roasting. If roasters are concerned about, well, how do we address the practical side of things? The great thing about the platforms these days is that we can share screens. I can be roasting with you. And I've done that heaps of times with roasters where they'll be roasting and I'll be like watching their profile as we go along live. And that's heaps of fun, and very doable and easy to do. And then normally I would be, saying, I could come and consult with you in your roastery. But with travel being a bit tricky at the moment, in Australia at the moment, it's okay. But unfortunately, internationally, not quite possible at the moment. But if I'm not doing anything online, I would be, working with roasters in their roasteries one-on-one. And then I've also got my my roasting course that I do here based in Melbourne as well. If anybody ever gets the chance to come to Melbourne again. And the roasting course is fabulous in terms of, it doesn't matter whether you're really experienced or a beginner. We use a specific roasting exercise where we sort of get the same coffee and we roast it 3 different ways. And it really challenges even the experienced roasters because they have to learn a new roaster and a new bean. So it really amplifies and highlights everything that they know or don't quite know about their roasting. So it's quite great. So and keep an eye out in the new year. There may be some exciting things popping up in terms of either a retail product and finally maybe a book. So hopefully that can come out next year. So yes, I've just got to make it happen.
Nice. Well, we'll definitely be looking forward to that and encourage everyone to check out everything you just mentioned. We'll link to that in our show notes. But Anne, it's been fantastic to talk with you, and I really appreciate your wisdom you shared here today.
Thank you so much for having me. It just feels like, there's still so much more to chat about. It's a shame it's, we've only got, an hour. So, but thank you so much for having me. It's been wonderful.
Well, everybody, I really hope that you enjoyed that episode and it gave you some great tools and insights to use in your roasting operation or to help you start your roasting journey on the right foot. And a huge thank you to Anne Cooper for joining us on the show. If you want more information about Anne and what she does, want to get in contact with her, I have a link in the show notes. The website is eqmr.com.au. For her company, Equilibrium Master Roasters, a lot of great resources there. And of course, speaking of great resources for the roasting industry, please go and subscribe to roastmagazine.com. Check out their new series, audio articles. You can find that at roastmagazine.com/audio articles. And with that is the end of our show. Thank you so much for joining me. And I'll see you here on the next installment of Rate of Rise from Roast Magazine and Keys to the Shop.